I kept the baby a secret. People say some choices make you who you are. I think some choices unmake you first. They peel you down to the bone until the person you used to be doesn't fit anymore, and then, if you're lucky, you grow around what you did and learn to carry it without bleeding all over the place. This is the choice that unmade me. This is the one I dressed in good reasons and carried like a virtue until the day I understood what it really was, a theft I committed with a steady hand. We were young in the way people don't believe they ever were, convinced timing bends for love, convinced fate makes exceptions for promise. He had a plan mapped out in neat lines, a prestigious internship, a graduate program everyone whispered about, a path that made adults nod when they thought we weren't watching. I had a plan that was simpler: survive the semester, work weekends, pretend the future wasn't a cliff edge. I loved him with the kind of hunger that makes you brave and foolish at the same time. When the two pink lines appeared, my first thought wasn't what now, it was his name, and then the sound of doors slamming in the distance. I found out in a pharmacy bathroom that smelled like disinfectant and old rain. The cashier rang me up with the indifference of a person who doesn't ask strangers to name their fears, and I took the test in a stall where the lock never caught unless you lifted the door a little. I watched the window bloom and I felt something tilt in the world, not just mine but the one that held both of us. I waited for panic to arrive and it didn't. A strange calm spread through me like cool water. I remember thinking, okay, this is the part where I become someone else. He was studying for an interview the night I almost told him. His notes were spread like a paper field across the table, and he kept tapping his pencil in that nervous rhythm that had driven me insane until it made me fond. He asked me to quiz him and I did, my mouth shaping questions while my body held a secret behind my ribs like contraband. He talked about policy and ethics and impact, all the words people learn to say when the future is a room they've already rehearsed walking into. I watched his face when he got an answer right, the flash of boyish pride he couldn't hide, and I saw two lives, the one where I told him, and the one where I didn't. I chose the one that kept the door open for him. I told myself I was being kind. The decision snapped into place not as a shout but as a sentence I rehearsed until it sounded true: if I tell him now, I ruin everything he worked for. It felt noble in my mouth. It felt like love if I tilted it toward the light just so. I told myself there would be time later, that not telling wasn't lying, it was waiting. I built a house out of that word and moved in. Waiting. I didn't tell anyone at first. I wore looser sweaters, learned how to carry my backpack in front of me, pretended I'd gained weight from late-night pizza and stress. My body changed in ways that felt both miraculous and intrusive, a private weather only I knew how to read. I googled symptoms at 2 in the morning and ate crackers in the dark to keep the nausea from swallowing me whole. I saved money in an envelope labeled books and scheduled doctor appointments between classes with a name I never used anywhere else. The receptionist smiled at me like I was already forgiven. I did not ask for what. He got the internship. He got the acceptance letter. He got everything he had pinned to the wall over his desk in neat squares of paper. We celebrated with cheap champagne and laughter that kept breaking into kisses, and when he fell asleep on the couch with his arm thrown over his eyes, I pressed my palm to the small curve of my belly and whispered that it was okay, that his father was going to do something extraordinary and we were not going to be the reason he didn't. It felt righteous to decide that for all three of us. It felt like I was protecting him from the version of himself who might have chosen us and resented us forever. It felt like I was saving everyone. I researched everything. Clinics. Options. Support groups with names designed to sound like hands. I made a list so long it looked like penance. Ending it felt like turning off a light I had just learned how to see by. Keeping it felt like inviting a storm into a house already missing windows. I met with a counselor who spoke softly and counted my breaths for me to prove they were still entering and leaving my body. She said whatever I chose would be a kind of grief, that love and grief share a wall thin enough to hear through. I left feeling steadier, which is not the same thing as feeling right. When I decided on adoption, I told myself I was choosing generosity. I read profiles of families who wrote like prayers, couples who had painted nurseries in hopeful colors, single women with maps of the world on their walls, a pair of men who loved to garden and sent photos of their dog wearing a bandana at Christmas. I picked a couple who described mornings as the holy part of the day, who said they wanted to raise a child who would rather ask a good question than give an easy answer. They lived a state away in a town where trees arched over the streets in a way that made the sky look benevolent. We exchanged letters that made me cry on buses. They thanked me for my courage. I didn't correct them. The lie grew a circulatory system of its own. I told him I had picked up extra shifts at work to save money for when he left. I told him I had a cousin I was visiting when I needed to disappear for appointments. I stitched together enough truth to keep him from seeing the hole underneath. He kissed my forehead and made me omelets in the morning and wrote me a postcard from the city he was moving to with a line at the bottom that said, "I can't wait until you're here." I held the postcard over the sink and wet it with tears until the ink changed shape. I did not call. I became very good at not calling. Labor was a private geography I had to cross alone. The hospital room was bright and cold and full of strangers who used my first name in a way that almost sounded like tenderness. Pain arrived like a story I had heard and not believed until it grabbed me by the shoulders. I counted ceiling tiles and then stopped counting anything at all. There was a nurse with kind hands who told me when to breathe and a doctor who said, "There you go, almost there," in a voice I wanted to hate and couldn't. When the air changed in the room, I knew without looking, there is a silence that only exists between the last contraction and the first cry. It opened inside me like a door to somewhere I had no map for. I asked not to hold him. That was the plan, the line I drew like tape across a doorway. The nurse nodded, a softness in her eyes that told me she had seen every version of this moment and none of them ever got easier. But plans have a way of dissolving in the presence of small, unavoidable truths. He made a sound, not quite a cry, more like a question, and my whole body answered. I said yes with my arms before my mind caught up to the word. They placed him on me and I learned 3 things at once: that love arrives without your permission, that it brings its own grief, and that I was not going to survive this intact. He was warm and furious and impossibly small. He quieted when I said his first name, the one only I would ever know. It fit him like a secret fits a mouth. I memorized the curve of his ear, the way his fingers opened and closed like he was practicing grabbing the world. I counted his breaths. I told him things I had never said to anyone, because I understood that this conversation would have to last us a lifetime. When the nurse asked if I was ready, I said no, and then I said yes, because both were true. The couple arrived with flowers and gratitude I didn't know what to do with. They cried in a way that made the room feel like a church. They told me they would honor me, that they would say my name with love, that he would always know he was wanted by more than one world. We took a photo I can't look at for long, a portrait of 3 adults trying to invent a language for something that breaks and blesses at the same time. I signed papers with a hand that shook so little I still resent it. I watched them buckle him into a car seat that looked too big for any human being, let alone this one. I sat in the hospital bed and held the space he left like it was still a weight I could keep warming. He left for his new city 2 weeks later. He asked if I wanted to come visit before he moved, and I said I couldn't get away. I stood at the window when his car pulled up, and I watched him carry a box to the trunk, watched him cup a plant with the kind of care he never remembered to save for himself. He looked up at my building as if he could feel me looking, and I stepped back from the glass before I did something reckless like run downstairs and reroute our lives. The car door closed. The world kept going. That's the cruelty no one tells you about choices. The sky does not dim to mark them. After, I became an expert on pretending to be fine. I went back to work with a smile I put on like sunscreen, practical, protective, a layer between me and the burn. I answered his calls with interest and edited my days into versions that didn't include lullabies sung to an empty room. When he asked if I'd thought more about moving next year, I said yes like a person who believes she deserves a next year. I told myself the worst was over. Then the adoption agency sent me the first photo. He was in a blue blanket that made his eyes look like something I'd never seen before. The couple wrote that he loved mornings and hated socks and had a laugh that arrived like surprise. I sat on my kitchen floor and gutted the envelope with my fingernail and learned I could cry without making a sound. Time is a trick. People tell you it heals, but mostly it teaches you how to hold. I learned the exact shape of a box that fit on the top shelf of my closet, the one where I kept the hospital bracelet, the first tiny hat, the photo that made my heart both swell and fold. I learned how to scroll without stalking, how to look at a town on a map without tracing the streets. It was an open adoption in theory. In practice, I was the one who kept choosing closed. Every letter I received took something out of me even as it gave something back. I wrote fewer replies than I should have. I told myself I was protecting him from confusion. I told myself I was protecting them from me. I told myself I was protecting myself from becoming the kind of ghost who knocks in the night and asks to be let in. Years later, I saw his father on a stage in a clip shared 1,000 times by people who love clean narratives. He was giving a talk about access and equity and all the ways systems fail quietly until someone kicks them into noise. He said we owe each other the truth. He said secrets rot the beams of anything we try to build on top of them. I sat in my living room with my laptop glowing like an accusation and I thought, you have no idea. He looked older and sharper and exactly like himself. I tried to imagine telling him. Every scenario ended with the room splitting in two and everyone in it falling through a different floor. I don't know if I did the right thing. That's the sentence I come back to when the other sentences start to fray. I know I did a loving thing. I also know I did a selfish thing. I kept the baby a secret because I believed I was saving his father's future, because I believed I was giving my son the kind of home I could not make then, because I believed I could hold all that believing by myself. Belief has a weight. So does silence. I carry both, and some days I can almost call it balance. Sometimes I write him letters I never send. I tell him about the day he arrived and the way the light looked on the floor and the name I whispered into his hair. I tell him about his father's laugh and the way he says certain words like he's tasting them for the first time. I tell him the truth in pieces small enough to swallow, because that's how I learned to take it myself. Then I fold the paper and put it in the box on the closet shelf. The box is fuller now. So am I. Neither of us is simple anymore. If you're waiting for me to say I will tell them both tomorrow, I can't give you that. Tomorrow is a promise I don't make casually anymore. I am trying to become a person who can walk into a room carrying the whole story without asking anyone else to hold it for me. I am not there yet. Maybe I will be when he turns 18. Maybe I will be when his father comes back to this city and I finally stop stepping away from windows. Maybe I will always be someone who tells the truth too late. I kept the baby a secret. I did it because I loved him. I did it because I was afraid. I did it because I wanted to be the kind of person who could carry the cost and I wanted to be the kind of person who never had to pay it. Both cannot be true. I live in the space between them. When I say my prayers, I include their names. When I say my name, I try not to leave out the part of me that made this choice. Some days I almost succeed.